Well, with marijuana now legal in many states, including here in Michigan, we're chatting about the effects that marijuana may have that some people are not necessarily thinking about on a regular basis. We're now joined by Dr. Elizabeth Walton. She's a clinical director with Rhesus Kids Dental. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, I am too, because honestly, when you have the conversation surrounding marijuana, I think many people are under the impression that there are no real risks.
Mhm. I think you're right. And there really are a lot of things that you need to keep in mind if you make certain choices for yourself and for your family as well.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's important to point out that our conversation today is more so focusing on children. You know, we've talked about that marijuana is legal recreationally in several states, including here in Michigan. We're not so much talking about responsible adult marijuana users in this conversation.
No, you're right. We're not.
Yeah, so we're talking about the kids. Now, it's not legal for them to be using it, but of course, we know that's a problem that continues to persist. And kids even thinking, oh, there are no real risks, but those risks are there, and especially for children. Can you talk about that, Dr. Walton?
Yes. So there are a lot of risks that come along with smoking marijuana and smoking it on a regular basis. I think the most prominent of those are what happens to you emotionally or mentally. You smoke a little bit of marijuana, it makes you feel better, and you think, that's great. I think I'm going to do it again tomorrow. We're going to hang out again after school, and maybe I'm going to skip school, and we're going to do it again. But there's something happens to the developing mind when there's marijuana that's added to the picture. And what happens is each time you smoke, it doesn't feel quite as good as it did before because the marijuana will bind to the receptors in your brain and it doesn't let go. So each time you feel a little bit not as good as before. And so then you tend to, this is why people call marijuana a gateway drug, because then you tend to graduate towards smoking more or more concentrated versions or graduating to a stronger medication or drug to try and get that sense of euphoria again. And
Yeah, it
that's what's
makes
really
sense.
tragic.
Absolutely. And again, focusing on children here, I'm understanding the reason this is such a big issue for them is the fact that their brains haven't fully developed yet to be mixing with this substance.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. And so you can postpone the use of this until you're an adult, then you don't have to worry as much about some of these issues. But there's also different things that are coming along now. There's always this argument, can you be addicted to marijuana? And in the concentrations that people were smoking maybe in the 70s and 80s, that wouldn't be such an issue. But there's something that's coming up a lot now where it's called cannabinoid use disorder, where you just have smoked so much marijuana that all you do is vomit. You just can't stop vomiting. The only solution is to stop use for the rest of your life of marijuana. And that can be a result of daily use for a prolonged period of time as well.
Wow. And do you think that is having to do with maybe just a change in concentration or potency compared to what the substances that were being used and passed out in the 70s compared to what's maybe available on the street today?
I think so, because it's something that people are only experiencing recently, but it is a pretty common problem. I can't remember the statistics, but it's one of the more common reasons that people go to the emergency rooms in America, and there's nothing that any physician can do.
Wow, interesting to know that. I want to quickly go back to this idea of young people's brains not being fully developed. You mentioned being able to put this off into adulthood to maybe avoid some of these concerns. But what is adulthood when it comes to smoking marijuana? Because it's not 18 and it's not 21 in terms of when your brain is fully developed, right?
Correct. And those are some questions that are a little bit hard to determine. It has to do with the, puberty, and it wouldn't be the same for male and female. But those are questions we could ask our physician friends. But I would say mid-20s would be safer.
Perfect. And I know that we are talking about the mental issues that can come with maybe just some of the chemical changes that come along with seeking that high, but we're also just talking about dental health and that it may not be great for your teeth as well. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so marijuana can cause dry mouth, and that's probably one of the biggest issues that causes us a whole bunch of different sequelae. So if you have dry mouth and there's no saliva in your mouth, you're not as protected against cavities. And also you can have an increased risk of periodontal disease. The bacteria can kind of change in your mouth and make you also more prone to those kinds of disorders. And then on top of that, we all know that you get the munchies when you've been having marijuana. And when you have the munchies, we tend to go for really foods that are really high in sugar and carbohydrates. And that also increases your risk of cavities.
Well, that seems like that would be an issue across the board, really, no matter what age you are, depending on your
Mhm.
habits and how you're handling those things.
Absolutely. And if you're not drinking enough water, that will compound it as well.
Wow. Okay. Interesting to know. I'm very curious to know, does it matter the form that you are taking this substance in? Does it matter if you're smoking it, taking edibles, or using many of the different forms that this substance is now available in? Does that change these effects at all, especially having to do with the tooth decay?
That's a good question. And I think that a lot of the tooth decay tends to come mostly from the smoking, because of the dry mouth and the changes that happen in your mouth. But I don't know. It's a good question. I haven't seen any studies about that.
Well, I'm also just wanting you to speak to young people right now. I find that it's just often hard to get them to understand that there are any real consequences with this. What would you say to a young person who thinks they are not at risk partaking in marijuana before their brains have fully developed?
I would just share that there's a lot of people that I went to high school with who committed suicide because they were so depressed after early drug abuse and use in high school and middle school. And I want everybody to be happy and live long, healthy lives. I think you should postpone this kind of recreation until you're older. Look for something else to do. Look for some other kind of rush or high with your friends, and don't turn to alcohol and drugs.
Wow, that was a really powerful message, Dr. Walton. I mean, you talked about some of the chemical changes that can happen when you seek happiness through this high. And so you're saying the long-term effects of that really can be lifelong mental health issues.
Absolutely. And it also impacts early marijuana use can also impact your ability to concentrate in school. So then school becomes more difficult, and you just end up with a whole bunch of problems that you were probably trying to solve when you were relaxing with some marijuana. And now you've got a whole bunch more issues that are going to impact you for the rest of your life.
Well, what am I leaving out in this conversation that you want people to know? Maybe people who are considering picking up the substance, or maybe people who are already regular users. Anything that I'm leaving out that you want to be sure people understand once they leave this conversation today?
I think you just need to really do your research. It's also important for parents to recognize the changes in their kids if they become withdrawn or have a little bit more of a temper, things like that. Also, it's not safe to use any substances in front of your children, especially things that can create secondhand smoke with marijuana. That's just something that your children can still increase their risk, even if they're not the ones that are doing the smoking themselves.
All right, Dr. Walton, some really important information here. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for speaking with us today.
Of course, thank you.